Hello and welcome to this festive edition of Spy Hard's podcast, where your hosts go deep undercover into the world of spy movies to decipher which films make the knock list. But remember, this information is strictly for your ears only. I'm Agent Scott.
And I'm Cam the Provocateur. And Scott, I should have left you where I found you.
It would have been for the best, to be honest with you. The last 5 years of your life's been pretty miserable.
No kidding. Like, this is just like a cautionary tale my entire life. Yeah.
Yeah. You'll be telling your kids about this.
If you ever wander into Agent Scott, leave him where you found him.
Often in a drunken stupor somewhere, I imagine.
Or just like screaming on a street corner about Condor Man.
Oh yeah, usually near like an office building of like the government.
Sure.
Which is why I'm on many watch lists.
That's right, yes.
They call me the Condor Man, which I actually take as a personal accomplishment, to be fair.
Let's just say, on the list this year, Scott has been very naughty.
Oh, I have. And you're right, it is Christmas time. We have a Christmas movie for you this week, and it's one you've been waiting for a very long time. And we can't wait to unwrap that present with you. We hope you enjoy it. But before we get there, haven't done this in a while, and I'm sorry about that, but we need to induct a new Spy Hard's Die Hard. Now, Cam, tell the people, what exactly is a Spy Hard's Die Hard and how they might just become one?
A Spy Hard's Die Hard is someone who leaves a review on Apple Podcasts, give the show 5 stars, and explains what it is they like, or frankly, you could say what you don't like about Spy Hards. It doesn't matter, we got the 5-star review, that's all that matters. And ultimately, we then read that review on the show, and then give you your top secret Spy Hard's Die Hard's codename.
We've had some pretty historic ones in the past, including Cam trying to read one in a Scottish accent that may have got him banned from the country of Scotland.
Yes, I have been banned actually, and there is a lawsuit currently in the works that I can't comment on.
Did it come through the window like they were tossing the caber, and that's how you got it, like that way?
Yes, you mean on the end of a log?
Yeah, they just lobbed it through your window.
There's a lot of damage right now to my apartment. I don't know if you can hear the wind just like blowing through my living room.
No, that's what you sound like on a microphone anyway.
Okay, it's just wind howling.
It's a lot of wind, Cam, I have to say.
Okay, well, that's fair.
Well, speaking of someone with a lot more to say than Cam, here is our review from the United States of America from a user named Otterproof. Yeah, you got to be Otterproof. I appreciate your prevention skills there. And they say, top tier, 5 stars. The depth of knowledge and enthusiasm for film from Cam and Scott contributed to Spy Hard's becoming my favorite podcast. Loving this already, Otterproof. Let's keep this train going. This is a must-listen for any movie fan. They have introduced me to some of my new favorites, such as The Liquidator and The Falcon and the Snowman, and I will subscribe to Horse Hards the minute it's released. This is one of my all-time favorite reviews. Otterproof, thank you. Horse Hards will happen one day. I guarantee it.
Okay, so now it's codename time, and I initially was thinking of, we're obviously talking about Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, and when they're coming up with the code names for each of the players in the movie, obviously those 4 words are what they use, but they have some ones they dismiss, like Poor Man and Sailor. But I was going to go with Sailor, but something's happened, Scott.
Oh.
And it was contained within the body of that text.
Okay.
They mentioned Horse Hards, which has been an ongoing joke on this show since, I don't know, episode 2 or 3 or something like that. And so I'm not going with Sailor. I'm not going with Poor Man. And so Otterproof, henceforth, shall be known as Jockey.
Oh, yes. I love that. Jockey.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Put a saddle on me and let's ride away. I love it. Well, Otterproof, congratulations on your new code name. You could use Jockey wherever you'd like. Official documentation. And if you do let us know with an email, and we'll try and send you an apology if that does end up on your passport. I genuinely apologize.
Yes. Although, you do get the bonus that, if The Simpsons taught me anything, there's a secret world of jockeys just waiting to be uncovered.
Oh, and jockeys do feature in A View to a Kill, so there's a little bit of that there.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. I didn't even think about that. Yeah.
It all connects. There you go, folks. Otterproof, thank you for the 5-star review. If you want to become a Spy Hard's Die Hard like Jockey, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. But without further ado, folks, let's get to the presents. I know you're all excited to unwrap them. Let's hit the review. Well, here we are, folks. It's the festive season, and we have quite the movie to celebrate this year. We've had a few interesting picks for Christmas movies. On Her Majesty's, a good pick, and some other of perhaps lesser quality over the years, Cam.
How dare you put down the package? But I do think we have found maybe the coldest, chilliest Christmas movie of all time.
Oh, I like what you did there. I like what you did.
Yeah.
But this film that we're about to talk about has been requested by you listeners since the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
We've had emails, we've had texts, we've had DMs, we've had tweets and posts and whatever you can have. Even probably a TikTok out there or two.
And a telegram.
And a telegram, smoke signals.
Whoever that guy was that sent that telegram, I mean, our props to you, sir. I don't know how you're listening to the podcast if you're sending telegrams, but nonetheless.
That's a dedicated listener right there.
That's right.
It is. It is. And we've finally listened. But then we realized Cam and I are chronically underprepared to review this film. And we've realized we needed some actual expertise to help stick the landing, to make sure you, the listeners at home, the spy-hards, if you will, are happy with kind of our review. We need someone who knows their stuff. And I can't think of anyone better than the man behind the Le Carré cast, the man behind Barbican Station. It is the one and only Mr. Jeff Quest.
Well, thanks for having me on. I don't know if I'm an expert, but I'm more than happy to step into the breach here.
I think, given your performance on our Deadly Affair episode, I think your credentials are pretty well proven.
Thank you very much. It's great to be back with y'all.
Well, yeah, you've George Smiley'd kind of with us before. So quasi Smiley. So I can't wait to sort of announce the film proper and talk about it in a second. But some exciting things, particularly one I think is worth mentioning in this intro sequence that ties very well into this film, has happened to you in the last 12 months, Jeff. And I just wanted to sort of see how you've been and anything new with you.
I'm trying to think of what that is now. Now I'm scared.
I was like, blank stare.
Oh. Well, I think you spent 7 minutes with a very important man to this film.
Yes. I was able to, for Barbican Station, which looks at the TV show Slow Horses, talk to Gary Oldman. So, yeah, that was a nerve-wracking but enjoyable experience.
And how was the kind of repartee in that experience, like that interview?
Well, they gave you like 4 minutes, so I had basically 2 questions.
4, all right.
But he was so engaged that he just kind of kept blabbering on, even as they were messaging me, telling me to stop the interview. So we got a little bit more time out.
I love getting those messages. They're like 2 minutes left, 1 minute left. Shh, stop talking. Like, no, I want it all.
Well, it wasn't even like I was talking. He would just, there was no point to jump in there and stop him. So, but it was a lot of fun. It was, it was great. He's really a smart guy.
If you're like, the agents and stuff like that, the people organizing this, it seems to me like it would be kind of like a pointless endeavor to say these are going to be 4-minute interviews, because that's not the way human speech works.
No.
I only speak in sound bites, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, we'll be cutting you down to sound bites, surely.
Like, maybe if you're talking to like a young star who's big on TikTok, but to the best of my knowledge, Gary Oldman is not a TikTok superstar yet.
Maybe by the end of this episode, maybe we can rise him up a little bit through the ranks.
Maybe. I mean, we need him dancing on video for
you
TikTok.
would. That is what you need, really, isn't it? And we're starting with high class already mentioning TikToks. This is exactly what the people who love this film want to hear. I will firstly point out that you can hear that interview right now, and we'll leave a link in the show notes below, so you can follow up this lovely interview with this lovely discussion with the interview, just to keep the Gary Oldman jazz flowing, if you will. But it's time, Cam. What is the present under the Christmas tree this year?
Yes, this year it is 2011's Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, starring, of course, Mr. Gary Oldman.
It's finally happening, folks. We're going to do it. Will we do it well? time will tell. Give it an hour and a half, and you'll be able to decide, I imagine.
Yeah, and it's also kind of a bookend somewhat on the year because we had Deadly Affair very early in the year, and then we've got Tinker Tailor coming right at the end.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot to discuss with this film, a lot to unpack. And, Cam and I'll preface with this. Our outlook going into this review, and we were speaking with Jeff about this beforehand, is we want this to be a review of the film.
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to an interview today with Tomas Alfredson, the director of this film, and he was advised by Jean le Carré, there's already a book, don't make that. There's already a TV series, don't make that. Make the film. And we're going to talk about the film. That's really what I want to critique. But I think we need someone here, and this is where Jeff comes in, who has seen it all and read it all and can kind of help us sort of connect dots.
Of course, yes.
I've got my pencil out, and I'm ready to guide you to those dots there.
Well, let's first of all set it all up. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, what's it all about? Here is your synopsis. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. How do you find an enemy who is hidden right before your eyes? In the bleak days of the Cold War, espionage veteran George Smiley is forced from semi-retirement to uncover a Soviet mole within his former colleagues at the heart of MI6.
That would work for both a movie and the, back of a book.
Yeah. And I'm amazed this entire book fits into a movie. I think this is one thing we will definitely get into. But I think the first topic is initial experiences. I actually watched this for the first time this year. And not for this, though. I watched it just casually, wanted to watch it, and had a really good time with it. And I think having seen 4 years' worth of spy movies really helped that. But I want to go to Jeff, because you've been a lover of le Carré for a very long time. You have a show about it. When did you first come across the film version of this story, and what were your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm amazed that you watch spy movies that aren't for the podcast. That I would imagine that's like the last thing that you would want to do. So, props to you on that one.
I do actually enjoy them, contrary to popular belief.
But for me, watching this movie, I saw it back when it first came out. In the theaters, and it was, it was something to be excited about because it was, it's only gotten worse, right, as time has gone on, but like a mature, like adult film, right? This isn't a film that is like a shoot 'em up film. It's a movie that you can go and your brain's going to be kind of engaged. And so that's what I really appreciated about this one.
It definitely engages the mind. It requires a lot of engagement, I think, to get anything out of it. But Cam, what did you make of your first adventure with Tinker Tailor?
So I remember being really excited to see this movie, and I knew next to nothing about John le Carré. I would have seen The Constant Gardener at that point, and that would have been probably about it. But the trailers were really effective, like really effective. And I remember going with my friend and seeing it and walking out and going, huh. Like, that was not what we expected. That was not at all what we expected going in, I don't think I expected anything like a James Bond film or anything like that, but it was so much chillier than I expected and more aloof that it was almost like I kind of didn't know how to process it. And I was very aware this was an incredibly acclaimed film at the time of release. And so I was like, I feel like I'm missing something. And this was actually an exciting chance to go back and maybe get a proper perspective, because I think the movie is very clear at what it's doing. And I think it took me a while to kind of come around to what its actual vibe is. One thing that actually really jumped out to me was one of my, I think, biggest complaints, if you talked to me in 2011, would have been that I felt like I didn't know the characters very well. And I sensed, without actually having any knowledge, that it was material that was much richer in the book that had been cut down a lot for a 2-hour movie.
I think I could see how a person would come to that, because there are a lot of people that sort of drop in and out of the film. You take Kathy Burke, as Connie Sachs. She's there for 10 minutes?
Yes.
And in the background for one scene, maybe?
Yeah, and I remember actually Colin Firth was a big part of my issue. was because I just didn't feel I knew his character strong enough
Mm.
to have a connection to him being exposed as a mole.
I'm just wondering what what Cam's expectation was there. Was it like George Smiley walking away from explosions and like beating up Russians and stuff like that?
Can you imagine George Smiley walking away from explosions? No, it was not any sort of expectation of it being an action film at all. But I think I was expecting something more perhaps intense, maybe a little more character driven versus mood driven.
Yeah. I just can't shake that idea of George Smiley as sort of a James Bond-esque figure. I want to see like George Smiley in Octopussy.
I mean, that would truly be an all-time high.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Now, obviously, we mentioned the book, of course, this is based upon, and the TV series that came out in I think the late 70s.
Yeah.
Yeah. But Cam, how did the film come to be?
Well, Scott, you mentioned it. There was the 1979 miniseries with Alec Guinness and Ian Richardson, which was a big sensation. But it was based on the 1974 novel, which was the first of the Carla trilogy by John le Carré, and the other two that followed being The Honorable Schoolboy and Smiley's People. And I actually had a question for Jeff here, if he could answer this. They made Smiley's People into a miniseries like they did Tinker Tailor. Whatever happened with The Honorable Schoolboy?
Well, that book, it kind of follows some different characters, and it's also set in Hong Kong and all over Southeast Asia. And the BBC at that time just did not have the budget to film that by any stretch of the imagination. So they kind of just like leapt over that and went right to Smiley's People.
Okay. And then I also have to ask, if they were to adapt The Honorable Schoolboy into a movie, do you think they would keep the title?
I don't know how you couldn't. You'd have to, right?
I think it'd be sacrilege to some people if you change the title.
Yeah. I don't know how you'd get away with it.
I could see battles in the exec room between like people who are like, we have to remain faithful to the source material, and the other ones being like, how do we market a movie called The Honorable Schoolboy?
You just put a gun in his hand and it'll be fine.
Who's gonna know what this is? Wait, why am I BBC people like from north of, it was like New York or something? I don't know why I gave them like, yeah, see, we're from the Beeb.
So the ball actually got rolling on this 2011 film when British screenwriter Peter Morgan, who's done movies like The Last King of Scotland, The Queen, Frost Nixon, and he's the creator of The Crown, convinced Working Title Films that there should be a new adaptation of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And he did a first draft of the screenplay that he's not credited with writing this film, but it was this push and screenplay that got this movie happening. He does have a exec producer credit, though, on the finished film.
I wonder how much of anything then is left of what he did. I know the American rights system is more to do with percentages of how much of the script to let is yours, but I don't know about the sort of British one.
Yeah, I don't know. And I mean, I'm not sure if it's a case where they looked at that first draft and said, okay, we really like, where this is going, but we want to start over fresh with perhaps a different angle on it.
From what I read in interviews with the screenwriter, he said that they basically scrapped that first draft and they went at it completely fresh with the director.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yes. And so they then brought in Bridget O'Connor and Peter Strawn, who are an English husband-wife writing team, and had worked together starting in 2006 on a coming-of-age comedy called 66. And then the next year they did a Cold War comedy called Mrs. Ratcliffe's Revolution. And then Peter Strawn went on and just worked on his own or did, co-writing jobs on movies like How to Lose Friends and Alienate People, which was a Simon Pegg comedy, The Men Who Stare at Goats for George Clooney and Grant Heslov, and The Debt, which Matthew Vaughn and Jane Goldman worked on as well. And then the pair re-teamed for Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And it is noteworthy that this is Bridget O'Connor's final film credit. She actually passed away of cancer in 2010 before this movie was released at the age of 49. And the movie's dedicated to her memory. And since then, Peter Strawn has gone on and worked on movies like Frank with Michael Fassbender and Conclave, which is probably going to be an Oscar contender this year.
That's the Ralph Fiennes, priest drama, right?
Yeah, about the appointment of a new pope. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, very good.
That's only now getting released in theaters in the UK. At time of
Oh.
recording, I should say.
I would have assumed because it's Ray Fiennes starring in it, it's just like that is a holiday in Britain. They shut things down. The schools are closed.
We put red smoke out of our cinemas. Ray Fiennes is in, everyone. Get to the theaters.
Well, and it's based on a book by Robert Harris, who's a big Brit author as well. So
Yeah, like why is there not a parade like that's just drowning everything out for like a week?
I'm sorry, I'm riding high on the red smoke coming out of theaters. I'm going to live on that one for a while. Thanks. No, I don't know much about Conclave, but what was the other one you mentioned, Cam?
Frank with Michael Fassbender. It was kind of
that I have seen. Yeah, it's a quirky little film, that one.
I haven't seen it. Is it any good?
It's kind of fun. It takes a character's head from something else that isn't connected. I can't remember what that head is from, and then puts it on another person. I don't think basically there's a lot to it. But I went to watch it because I recognize what the character's head is. I've now forgotten for this point of this conversation, and then had nothing to do with it, and so I just watched the film anyway, and I was like, oh, this is a rather charming kind of British indie film.
Yeah, it was, as I said, Michael Fassbender wearing a papier-mâché head for the entirety of the runtime.
Yes.
Yeah, and so I remember it was polarizing. Some people like really loved it, and then other people were like, what is this? This is unacceptable.
Quirky was what I wrote, is all I remember is the word for it.
Right. Okay. And so they have this script, and actually one of the directors who was really, really strongly considering it was Park Chan-wook, the acclaimed South Korean director of Old Boy, Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, A Stoker, and he really was considering it, but was terrified of doing it because he was such a fan of the source material and the miniseries, and he just did not want to screw it up. So he actually came back later in 2018 and directed the Little Drummer Girl miniseries.
I was hoping you'd mention that, which he did a terrific job with.
He was clearly not a fan of the Diane Keaton film and scared of screwing that up.
Yeah. Like, well, I've seen the bar. It's very low. So I think I could just step over that.
I'm good. I just have to show up.
Yeah. Cast someone that isn't in their mid-40s, and I've got it.
Yeah. Yeah, and so instead the job went to Tomas Alfredson, who was a Swedish director who'd been working in the TV and film industry in Sweden since the late 80s. And it wasn't until really 20 years after he'd started working that he had a big breakthrough with 2008's Let the Right One In, which is a vampire film, kind of coming-of-age story that really became a bit of a sensation in at least North America. I'm not sure about Britain.
Pass. From what I can tell, Britain didn't let it in.
Very good. Very
good. I will also add, it's both heartwarming and nerve-wracking to hear that it took 20 years for Tomas to be sort of found or have his big break, as it were, because, you know, we're all just trying our best here and we're waiting for that big old moment. Jeff, do you think we have 20 years in us?
I've got 4 or 5 years of podcasting in, so another 15, then it's gonna be all money everywhere.
We're just getting started. We're limbering up, is what you're saying right now. Right. Okay.
Yes, exactly that.
Okay. All right.
I'm really looking forward to hitting my prime in my 60s.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be very exciting.
Well, that's the positivity of podcasting, is you can do that with no video. We won't have to see you age. As long as your voice holds out, we won't have to like visually know you've got older.
Okay, well, fair enough. But yeah, Let the Right One In was remade as Let Me In, directed by Matt Reeves. And then he's gone on to do movies like The Batman and the Planet of the Apes films. So that one, it was kind of a dud in terms of box office, the remake. The remake is okay, but the original is absolutely fantastic. And Tinker Tailor was actually his follow-up to Let the Right One In, and it came 3 years later, and it was his English language debut. And, you know, Tinker Tailor comes out. Obviously, it's not a box office juggernaut, but it's very acclaimed, and you know, it definitely finds its audience. But Alfredson actually took 6 years away between Tinker Tailor and his follow-up when he reteamed with Peter Straughan for 2017's The Snowman with Michael Fassbender. And after that movie, he went back to Sweden.
Was he wearing a papier-mâché head?
No, he played a character named Harry Hole, and he was investigating a serial killer in that film, and it's one of the most messy, convoluted, frankly unfinished movies that's ever been shown on the big screen.
Well, you've mentioned this film to me numerous times. I've never seen it because I think I saw the poster and I was like, this isn't for me. Pass.
Yeah.
But you have brought this film up in conversation many times when it comes to like utter failures.
Well, like Thomas Alfredson on the press tour for the movie was like, "We didn't even finish this movie. There's like 15% still needs to be shot."
That's a troubling press tour. I'm sure like his like manager in the background was just pulling what's left of his hair out, and just like, how do I stop this?
It's a crazy movie. They introduce so many subplots that you spend a torturous amount of time on that just vanish completely, and it's about, I think, like 2.5 hours. It's a true disaster.
Well, keeping up the festive theme though, Snowman is Christmas. I'll throw it to you, Jeff. You could be the deciding vote, as I don't have one, I suppose. What's your take on the Snowman?
It should have just melted away.
Ah,
Boom.
There we go. Good stuff.
Yeah. So Alfredson, though, when it came to this movie, there was a quote as to what he wanted this movie to, I suppose, look and feel like. And the quote he gave was, "The movie should have the scent of damp tweed and the color of an old man's foreskin."
What is a? I was going to ask a question I don't want to know the answer to there.
I could just see you picturing it in your head now.
I can't stop picturing it in my head. That's the problem. Yeah, okay. Well, it gets the tweed down. I can't really affirm the other half.
Now, is that going to be the feel of this podcast when we hit our prime in like 15 years?
Damp tweed and old man foreskin.
Yeah.
That's our introductions, right? Hi, I'm Damp Tweed.
And I'm old man foreskin. So this movie has a massive cast, and there was actually some people cast that didn't wind up in the movie. Michael Fassbender was cast as Ricky Tarr.
This guy gets around.
Right? But was replaced by Tom Hardy due to scheduling conflicts with X-Men First Class. And actually, likewise, Toby Jones had to step in to replace Jared Harris as Alaline due to Sherlock Holmes' A Game of Shadows conflicts.
Gerard Harris. I have to look him up.
Jared Harris, yeah. I mean, he was Moriarty in Sherlock.
Oh, sure. Yes, I know him. Okay.
Yeah, he was in Mad Men too, right? Wasn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep, Mad Men, Morbius. That's the big three.
that's the trifecta right there.
Yeah, that's right.
Son of Richard Harris, the famous actor.
And we've actually covered Richard Harris quite a bit on the show, especially on I think the Patreon. He showed up in like Wild Geese, and we covered that.
Oh yeah, that's his dad. Yeah, right. You're right. I think I like where we ended up with the casting. It is ironic that we spent about 2 hours talking about Tom Hardy in the last month or so, and I think he does more in his 10 minutes in this film than he does in This Means War.
I think he'd agree with you. And it's interesting that like Peter Straughan, co-writes this film. They cast Michael Fassbender. It doesn't work out, but then Michael Fassbender does, Frank with Peter Straughan later down the road.
This is all connected, and for some reason, Morbius is involved.
Exactly. Morbius is always involved, so it's always Morbin time.
I wish it wasn't. It's Christmas time or Morbin time. You decide which you'd rather celebrate.
Now, with Gary Oldman being cast, and he was Alfredson's number one choice, but there was other actors who wanted the role. That's all I could find. Like they said, a lot of actors were swirling around it and wanted it, but Gary Oldman was always the first choice that Alfredson was going after. Apparently, John Hurt actually pitched himself to play that role, but instead was cast as C. And he was like he was content with that role, but he really wanted to play Smiley.
I could see another universe where John Hurt plays Smiley. I suppose it really comes down to how you interpret your visual of what Smiley looks like in his age, because John Hurt to me is someone who is retired or is about to retire, or obviously has passed since, but definitely retired now. But No laughs, so I've just left a hang on that one. Thanks, everyone. Cheers, guys. I sound like an awful human being there.
I was like, am I supposed to laugh? I don't know. I'm uncomfortable.
I don't know. But I would, from what I've experienced of George Smiley so far, and just in the few sort of films he's popped up in, I have him as someone sort of in his 40s, early 50s maybe, who isn't quite ready for retirement, but is close to it. And I think that's more Gary Oldman's age.
Well, I had a question actually for Jeff. When this movie is coming out, were you excited about Gary Oldman getting the role? Was he the Smiley you envisioned?
Well, I think part of it is like Alec Guinness was so iconic, and so a lot of people, when they pictured Smiley, even Le Carré, had a hard time writing Smiley after Alec Guinness played him because he couldn't get his voice and out of his head. So I think he was that was the kind of the look. And when you look at the books, he's kind of supposed to be more on the later end of his 50s. Kind of, he's always retiring and coming back to work at the circus, and a little more rounder and plumper. And Gary Oldman's a little skinnier maybe than most, if you're a reader of the books, what you'd envision Smiley.
Should he have worn his Winston Churchill bodysuit?
I was going to go down the Slow Horses route, sort of what he looks like in Slow Horses. That maybe is closer.
I think so. Well, definitely not the hair and the beard and all of that, but definitely his kind of more stocky physique for sure.
Okay. And actually, Gary Oldman was really nervous about the role because of Alec Guinness, but also one of the things he really obsessed over was finding the right glasses. And he went to a Pasadena vintage eyewear store called Old Focals, and he had talked to his friend Colin Firth, and co-star in this film, who had found his glasses there for the movie A Single Man, which was a Tom Ford film that was very acclaimed. And Gary Oldman said he drove Alfredson absolutely nuts over the glasses, but he said, this is Smiley's Aston Martin, and he felt like he had to get it right to even get the character.
Could we just stop and just appreciate the pun in that building's title? Old Focals is that is the best pun I've ever heard. Whoever owns that shop, I should shake their hand.
Right. Well, I imagine you could visit there and probably spend an insane amount of money on a pair of glasses.
I imagine you could, and yeah, I mean, I guess I read it as the Smiley's glasses is the DB5. It's the Aston Martin, or it's the Walther PPK or PP7, depending on your age. Like it's the tuxedo, it's the martini, it is the iconography of the character.
Do you have the sense, Jeff, that that's the case with other adaptations that feature Smiley?
I don't know. I don't know that. I think for me that was like Oldman's way into the character versus that being. I mean, the one thing that he always is doing is taking his glasses off and kind of cleaning them on his tie, and that's kind of his go-to maneuver. So they're definitely a part of him. But I don't know if it's the most iconic thing with Smiley. So it's interesting that that's what Oldman felt. He went with some giant glasses, though. They're huge. I mean, oh my gosh.
He should have worn like those giant novelty sunglasses from back in the day. That would have been incredible. What a choice.
He could see the spies more easy with the big glasses. Like he could see them any angle. It's a great move. What a good way for a spy detective to have.
What if he had shown up in the Dr. No Felix Leiter glasses?
Oh, the Jack Lord ones?
Yeah, the ones that are like cat's eye glasses.
I always lean more towards the spy action films, but if he did that, I think I would be a convert to the colder side of things. I'd be George Smiley over 007 any day.
And Jeff, what would you say Smiley's most iconic features are? Because you said not necessarily the glasses.
I mean, I think he's just this kind of frumpy character, so the clothes don't normally fit him. He's kind of just he's not somebody who kind of fits in his own skin. So it's almost it's not necessarily a thing that you see. It's a vibe.
Okay.
Finally, a spy character I can play.
Maximum frump.
That's what they call me.
And so the budget for this movie was $21 million. Domestically, and it's always weird when they say domestically because it's a British film, but they're talking about North American numbers. But in North America, it did $24.1 million. International did $57.4 for a worldwide total of $81.5.
Respectable.
Yeah, I mean it's 4 times what the budget was. But I guess if you're going to talk sequels, maybe it wasn't a big enough number for them to immediately look at greenlighting something.
Well, you do the math that they use, and you double your budget for marketing. And there was a heavy push for the marketing, from what I've read. There were a lot of posters, a lot of interviews and stuff being given. There was a lot on that front, so I could buy that there was 40 million spent at the end of the day with everything. But then making another 40 million on top, I don't know. I feel like that means room to grow. I mean, Dr. No didn't make a ton of money.
Mm-hmm. No, that's fair.
Well, it was put out by, what was it, like some smaller kind of indie film folks, where that probably is a bigger win than it would be for like Warner Brothers or something.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so the top 3 for the year, number 1 was Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2. And number 2 was Transformers Dark of the Moon. And number 3 was Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides, which is, 1 out of 3 ain't bad, I suppose, folks. But this landed at number 86 at the worldwide box office for the year, between the Tailor Lautner action film Abduction and the Paul Bettany supernatural action film Priest.
Well, at least one of those 3 has gone on to have a history.
That is an unholy sandwich.
It truly is. Although it's nice that, Conclave is now the sequel to Priest, of course.
Yeah, I did see Priest. I did not see Abduction.
I don't think I've seen anything with Taylor Lautner in.
Yeah, that was coming off the Twilight movies, and that was his kind of action film attempt.
I can't wait to never click on that on any streaming service.
I hope it doesn't have spy connections.
What's it called again? I'll look while you talk.
Abduction.
Oh no! Please don't do this to us.
If it does, Scott, you'll be watching it in your free time, obviously.
Oh no!
And so this movie was obviously a big deal on the awards circuit. At the Oscars, it was nominated for Best Actor for Gary Oldman, but lost to Jean Dujardin for The Artist. It was nominated for Best Screenplay, and it lost to The Descendants, the George Clooney film. And it was nominated for Best Original Score, but lost to The Artist again. This was a weird year. This was the year of The Artist, sweeping the Oscars that we now look back on and go was there a gas leak? What was going on?
I was just thinking about that. That's a weird blip on the radar there.
Yeah. And at the BAFTAs, it performed better, just in terms of nominations, but it won Best British Film and Best Adapted Screenplay, and was nominated for Best Film, Director, Actor, Score, Cinematography, Editing, Production Design, Costumes, and Sound. It lost the Best Film, in case you're curious, to The Artist.
I have some bad news for you, Cam.
Okay, what's that?
Abduction is probably a spy film.
Okay, well, stay tuned, folks. That will not be your Christmas present in the future.
Lump of coal.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. You can actively stop us if you prefer. By joining our Patreon or something like that. Just join purely to stop us from covering that film. We'd appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah. And John le Carré really praised this film. He was quite involved in it. Like he said, he was very open to any questions they had and was something of a resource during the production. But he, as only an author might say, he gave them a lot of props for reducing an ox to a Boolean cube.
What? As in, are we reading it? I'm trying to Britishize this statement because obviously he's British, so a Boolean.
It's kind of a famous phrase he has talked about when he talks about his film adaptations. Is watching your novel turned into film is like watching oxen turned into a Boolean cube. You're kind of watching something that you get chopped up into a million little pieces. So.
But he was happy with that chopping up process this time, at least.
He seemed to be, yes.
Yep. Okay.
It was a delicious cube.
And I can't wait to take a bite out of it.
Oh, perfect segue.
Let's get to it. Let's take a chunk out. And, Jeff, you've come in here with all this expertise. You have a show about the works of John le Carré. You are the man. We are here bowing at your feet. Why don't you lead us off with your thoughts now on Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy? Because, a film you watched when it came out, this has been 13 years since that point. Has that of the film changed over the years? What do you think of it now?
Yeah, it's interesting. I did a quick rewatch before we talked here. Again, I've seen it probably, before this at least 3 or 4 times, and so I watched it again. And I came at it with a little different view this time. I mean, I always knew it was a mystery, but it felt more like a mystery this time. And so, it's setting up the suspects, and it's kind of unfolding as he's trying to figure out what's going on. More than it's a spy movie, but it's a mystery spy movie, and so I was just interested in that, and I just think visually it's so beautiful. I think I love all of the visuals, but I also think the editing, which is another thing that I noticed this time in particular, was really good. Compared to, I mean, just of folding in all of these different stories, because you have all these interrogations and all of these different things that people telling their stories, and the way it was cut together to keep things moving. I was really impressed.
Yeah, it was actually edited by Dino John Sater. I may have the pronunciation wrong, but he'd worked on Let the Right One In, which was also like a really tight film in the same way this movie is.
I think, just unpacking that a little bit, and I'll allow it to segue into maybe my thoughts, is I think one thing this film benefits from is revisits.
Mm-hmm.
Because inherently the story is incredibly dense.
Yes.
There is a lot to unpack, and there is a lot to present on screen. And I think in lesser hands, this could have been done very differently. But it's interesting you came to it with a sort of a different perspective this time around, because you're coming at it from the first time you saw this film, Jeff. You knew the answer to the equation. You knew who the mole was. And I suppose a question I want to throw back at you, although it's maybe hard for you to speak to it because you can't speak to a thing you haven't experienced, but do you think knowing that answer helped guide you through it the first time you watched that film? Or do you think it actually maybe hindered your enjoyment a little bit?
For me, I would say it didn't hurt knowing that. I enjoyed it, and it didn't. I think the idea is right. Do you see it coming or do you not? Is it too obvious? Is it not obvious enough? Does it make sense how it all threads through? And so one of the nice things was watching it, with my wife, who wasn't familiar with it at all. And so she was able to kind of track through it. And so I was like, okay, it's not just me knowing where we end up. I think it did do a decent job of, telling that story and making it make sense.
And I actually had a question, because you're familiar with the miniseries, I would assume. And what are the kind of the differences in just the storytelling? What the movie's doing versus what the BBC adaptation was doing?
Well, obviously the obvious one is they had more time, right? So, I mean,
Mhm.
you're a 2-hour movie versus, like, what was it, 8 episodes or whatever of a TV show is vastly different. But then the other thing is, like, the TV show kind of took the book and did it more kind of linearly.
Mm.
And just kind of, whereas the movie really hops around and it kind of shuffles some stuff up and throws in even new elements that weren't in the book or the TV series. So, I think it's trying to, because it has less time, again, this is more of like a vibe movie, right? It's got to get the vibes right of what the book was versus putting it all out there exactly as it is in the book.
Yeah, there's a lot of like feelings of like nostalgia and playing with memory throughout the film that I would have to imagine, if you're saying like it's more linear in the miniseries, that aspect isn't necessarily played the same way, whereas here you have a lot of scenes where it is reflections on the past.
Yeah, and that's another thing that popped in my head on this rewatch is it does such a good job of putting you in Smiley's head through that editing, right? Where they're cutting to these past scenes, so you're getting kind of a sense of what he's thinking about without him talking, that I really thought was effective.
I think that actually leads beautifully to my opening statement on the film. And that is, if we're speaking of nostalgia, we're speaking of evoking a feeling, a mood. When I was a young lad,
Uh-oh.
I was a part of the circus, and I knew a guy called Bill. No,
He was a sword swallower.
yes. Whoa, Cam, Jesus,
That's an actual circus job.
Oh! I thought you were going somewhere else with that one, young man.
Oh, please.
Oh,
It's Christmas, sir.
oh. Well, you're quite right. My mind's in the gutter. I should elevate, not take us down.
You are behaving like you're at the MI5 Christmas party.
Yeah, I put loads of vodka in that punch. I'm John Hurt. I'm getting loose.
That's right.
I'm going to bring out the Santa costume in a minute with the Stalin face or whatever it was. It was that was quite a sight to see.
That was a thing.
Well, apparently it was.
Yeah.
Well, no, apparently that's something that could have happened according to David Cornwall, John le Carré. When I was young, my parents used to take me to pubs, and when I was young, the smoking ban hadn't been put in.
Right.
So you would go to a pub at the weekend, and there is something about that sticky, smelly room that you'll never get out of your pores. Like the walls had like sludge to them because there's just no ventilation in those things, and there's something very tangible about that world, and I still remember it. And I've never seen anything ever evoke that feeling like this. That those men sitting in the soundproof room, chain smoking, I could literally feel that room. I could actually put myself in there as a sixth man at that table. And that's a credit to the director, it's a credit to the cast, credit to the set designers, it's a credit to the costumers, credit to the cinematographer. Everyone here is working overtime to pull off something that I think is quite frankly lightning in a bottle.
Mm-hmm.
These elements shouldn't work. This story should not be able to be told in 2 hours. Especially even with this caliber of actors. There is so much to get across. And yet I think this film, at its best moments, is actually when it's quiet, when there isn't dialogue, when you just get Smiley turning something over in his head, thinking about something. And it's absolutely insane that this film has able to stick the landing of pulling off such a labyrinthian story, making it digestible and fairly easy to follow, in a way that I think even someone who isn't well versed in the world of spy movies like we are can get a grip on it. And Jeff, your wife sat down and watched. I don't know how much spy literature or spy movies she digests, but if she was able to get on board with this film, I assume the average audience goer was too. And I'm glad it did get some recognition at awards, at least from the Brits. But, I mean, going back to the top line, I think this is literally lightning in a bottle. And I think I'm almost glad there was no sequel, because I don't think they would have done it twice.
Yeah, and who knows if Alfredson would want to come back, if he would feel like he's repeating himself, and there's something about the elements here that just add up to what this specific movie is.
Which is smelly.
No, Smiley.
Oh, George Smelly. Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, I was like, what? These pubs you're going to? Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, that is literally the thing, though. That's something I can genuinely describe to you. It is a grim smell. It's stuffy and it's like it's claustrophobic.
Well, there's something just in terms of the wallpaper in this movie.
Yeah.
It's not expensive production design just to have wallpaper, but like they find the perfect wallpaper for so many scenes. And of course the the soundproof control room is the one that people are going to point to. And just the way it's not only on the walls, but it reflects on the table as well. Like it feels like it's just this almost like suffocating immersive environment. But also there's the scene where you see Mark Strong being tortured.
Yeah.
And the way you have that like grungy pink wallpaper and the woman in the background just reading a newspaper, it's a lot of atmosphere for very little money. This is not like green screen that required thousands of people to fill in all the little dots. It is just really, really smart, evocative production design.
Yeah. And I going back on something I said before, I think you will be better served by going back to this and rewatching it, especially if you've only watched it once, or you're watching it once for this. I would almost recommend a second serving of it to really get into the granular of some of the characters' motivations and the acting choices that some of the actors make. But we'll come back to that because, Cam, we haven't heard from you.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think that perhaps the first time, the other mistake was seeing this movie after drinking maybe 4 glasses of Coke out at dinner, and then heading to the 9 p.m. screening of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Like, some movies you can watch anytime. I am sure I could watch Taylor Lautner's Abduction any time of day and have the same experience.
Who'd have thought Taylor Lautner getting multiple shout-outs in the Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy review? That guy will get you.
That's right. That's right. And honestly, most movies are like that. When you go down the top 3 for the year, like I could watch a Transformers movie or a Pirates of the Caribbean movie and have the same experience pretty much any time of day. But there was something about seeing Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy this morning. I just got up earlier, made breakfast, and then sat and watched it. And just, in a quiet apartment and being pulled into the atmosphere of the movie. And I enjoyed it so much more. And it really was like, I think in a way, Scott, you asked Jeff this question earlier, but like me knowing Colin Firth was the mole honestly helped. It kind of was like, okay, I can focus on that, but I don't have to worry about it. I'm not sitting there trying to figure out a plot while at the same time feeling like the characters are sometimes passing me by. I could just sit there and focus more on like the behavior and the smaller reactions of the actors, whether it was Tom Hardy or Mark Strong, who really jumped out to me, both of them this time. Tom Hardy was a little showier anyway the first time, but like Mark Strong's performance I thought was really fantastic. And I really enjoyed this movie. I thought the vibe of it was fantastic, and perhaps because we've covered some Le Carré films in the past, Little Drummer Girl, and also, I wasn't a huge fan of The Russia House. I like Deadly Affair quite a bit, but this to me felt like the one that maybe captured the kind of tone of what Le Carré is going for. And I am not someone who's read Le Carré novels, but in terms of seeing the movies and then also watching like The Night Manager,
Sure.
This feels kind of truer to that kind of that world and that feel. And I just found it so much more immersive this time. And honestly, like, I think if you'd asked me when I walked out of the movie the first time, so do you want to see, The Honorable Schoolboy? I'd have been like, I'm probably okay. But when I finished this movie, it actually really left me wanting to follow kind of the Carla storyline further and dive into further material.
Well, it does feel like it really is setting up for a sequel.
Yeah.
That whole table sequence at the end when he sits down, sort of, it's almost at the end of the pilot episode of The West Wing. You get Martin Sheen just saying, "What's next?"
It's like the ending of Conan the Barbarian.
Right. Often, 2 films people put together: Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, Conan the Barbarian. I would. Don't worry about Colin Firth. Let's just get Arnie in there.
That's right. That's right. Or the ending of, was it Riddick, the second one or something like that, where he was on a throne at the end?
I don't think I've ever seen a Riddick film.
Oh, okay. Well, we can do them on the Patreon, I suppose.
Yay! Sign up, folks. Get your Riddick content.
Merry Christmas.
I could hear a ching in the background. What is going on?
That was me, just upgrading.
Oh, there you go. There you go. Thank you, Jeff. Welcome aboard. I'm glad you've upped your like of the film, and I'm glad you don't actually put it down to just having experienced more spy movies. It's actually more just it was more based on when you watched it and giving it the appropriate amount of attention it needed.
Yeah, and I think, like, honestly, I'm a big fan of Let the Right One In and focusing much more on what Alfredson wants out of the film, because this is pretty actually true to the themes of Let the Right One In, where it's sort of this chilly, cold world and people trying to find connections where they can, whether it's Tom Hardy, with the Arena character. You have Benedict Cumberbatch with, his lover, who he breaks up with at a certain point. And you have Smiley and his wife, the ongoing drama there. And it's just people trying to hold on to something in a world that's kind of pitiless. And that is kind of the core story of what Let the Right One In is, as well as just similar kind of vibes where it is kind of like quiet, chilly, aloof, punctuated by moments of really like haunting violence. The 2 movies actually would make a good back-to-back feature if you want to be maybe depressed.
You're right, though. It is a great, like, early morning, like, before the world has kind of risen. I did the same thing. I was watching it this morning, and it is just, like, everything's quiet, and the movie is quiet. It just fits that kind of vibe, I think.
Yeah, I could also probably see myself watching it just later at night on a night off if I'm I'd want to be well rested. It's not a movie like you could just throw on late at night if you are, coming off a 5-day work week.
That's more of an abduction type of situation, right?
That is an abduction situation. You want to be abducted by abduction.
You do. You really do.
Sorry to interrupt the discussion, gents, but I have some breaking news. To celebrate the festive season, we are giving away another copy of John Walsh's fantastic book, The Third Man, the official story of the film. To enter, all you have to do is join our Patreon at any of the paid levels before January 31st, 2025. Once you've joined, your name will be put into a hat and the winner will get a signed copy of the book alongside some other Spy Hards goodies. Plus, you'll have access to over 100 bonus Spy Hards episodes. Sounds like a deal if you ask me. But don't worry, folks, if you're already a member of our Patreon, you'll be automatically entered into the draw. You don't have to do anything at all but sit back and enjoy. So, if you want to get your hands on a copy of this tremendous book, make sure to join our Patreon on any of the paid tiers before the 31st of January 2025. You can find a link to the Patreon in the show notes below, or head on over to patreon.com/spyhards. But without further ado, let's get back to your regularly scheduled Spy Jinx.
It sounds like we have a lot of good things to say about this film, so let's get to the likes. Jeff, why don't you take us off? Why don't you start us off with a like?
Well, I think maybe sticking with the Christmas theme, one of the things that they didn't have in the books or the TV show, right? This is completely invented for the film, is this Christmas party that they keep flashing back to over and over again. And I think that's kind of a masterstroke because it's a chance to get all these people together that we've been seeing through the movie, see them in this different kind of environment, and just drop these little clues and hints about things throughout. I thought that was really a smart choice on their part and just an additive thing. And, apparently it was actually Carré who kind of planted the seed there because he would talk to the screenwriter about the crazy Christmas parties that would happen. And so he took that and put it into the movie, which I think is also really great.
I mean, it looks like a kind of Christmas party I'd like to go to.
As long as you're not bringing your wife, like if I, that's the thing I was like, oh my gosh, you see him off in the bushes there. That was a little awkward.
I having not read any of the source material, I feel like George Smiley has terrible luck with women after the two films I've seen.
Honestly, watching Deadly Affair, I thought really helped me with this movie because we got to see that marriage in that movie much more explicitly. And then, so I was carrying over my relationship with that movie to this film and going, oh, like, I actually understand the weight of all of this in a different way now.
That is a good pairing.
And I think that's like the first story, isn't it?
Yeah.
Deadly Affair is the first Smiley story. So you're seeing the relationship fall apart, and then you get Tinker Tailor, it's basically just in ruins anyway.
Well, until the end, perhaps.
A positive outlook.
I mean, I don't suspect it's going to go that well in the long term, but again, it's that kind of finding little moments of connection where you can in a world that otherwise doesn't care about anybody.
No, you're right. And I think if I'm going to chuck in my top like, and I think this is a man who needs to be discussed, and that's Gary Oldman. I don't know much about the character in the book or the TV show he's basing it on. I don't know whether this is an entirely Gary Oldman George Smiley. I don't know where the listeners at home sit on their favorite George Smileys or their favorite, if it's an Alec Guinness or a Gary Oldman situation. But I found this to be just a transfixing performance. I think he did more with nothing than anyone I've ever seen. He did more with a look than most actors I've ever seen. And you've seen him in many films going absolutely bonkers. You think of Leon, where he's just screaming everyone and popping pills left, right, and center, or Fifth Element, where he's just completely nuts.
Or True Romance. That's another one I always think of. Yeah.
This is like the stripped back Gary Oldman that I assume he probably always wanted to do a character like this. And it just proves what a versatile guy he is. And this is why I'm mostly jealous of you, Jeff, that you got to spend 4 to 7-ish minutes with the guy, because I think, although to be fair, I think I probably run ragged trying to find the right 2 questions to have, because that's really the hardest thing, pinning it down. What's weird, though, is in my dislike column is George Smiley.
Oh.
The twist we didn't see coming.
I like to keep you on your toes, folks. I think Gary Oldman's performance is fantastic. I think he does wonderful things with silence, with a look, with a hand gesture, with cleaning his glasses. But I found myself frustrated with the character of George Smiley and not being able to really find myself rallying behind him. Not that maybe he is that kind of guy, mate. Yeah, he's as grey as the rest of us are in real life. But I found the character of George Smiley and the composite character that is in The Deadly Affair suffers from the same thing for me. Whereas I know he is trying to do what is the greater good of the right thing for Queen and country. I just find him completely unapproachable and also very, very cold.
I actually had a question about that for Jeff. When, because again, I haven't read the novels featuring Smiley, do they bring you a little more into his interior world, like, through his narration or anything like that?
I mean, you definitely get more of I think this movie in particular he's more aloof than you would see in other versions. I mean, Oldman doesn't speak for the first 20 minutes of the movie, which is kind of crazy, right? And I think that all plays into, if you probably looked at the amount of dialogue he has in this film, there's not that much, except for that epic, monologue that he does, which we'll probably talk about. But he's as a character, he's much more aloof than you would get in the books.
Well, like I remember James Mason as Quasi-Smiley in Deadly Affair, like vomiting into a sink. And I just can't imagine Gary Oldman has ever vomited in this movie. Like that Smiley has had almost no unrestrained human movement. And to me, I was reminded actually of a quote Christopher Nolan gave about Tom Hardy. They were asking him about Dunkirk and how Tom Hardy has the mask on the whole movie. And he just said Tom Hardy can do so much acting just by blinking an eye, just by the way he just does a slight little movement of his face. He said that's what makes it work. And I thought of that quote actually when I was watching the movie. A, because Tom Hardy pops up in this movie, so I was reminded of it. But B, because that's kind of what Gary Oldman's doing. And as Scott, you said, Gary Oldman is an actor who's often known for swinging for the rafters. Even something like Bram Stoker's Dracula, he's not necessarily screaming a lot, but that's a big performance. And so that's kind of what people loved about him. He, really burst onto the scene with Sid and Nancy, where he was playing Sid Vicious, not a subtle character on screen, or in life. And so to see what he's doing here, where it was so still, the way he draws you in, I think is just a masterclass in how to do that type of performance. I'd be curious if Gary Oldman would have felt he was confident enough to do something like that when he was younger. I feel like he might have said no. But in this movie, I remember at the time being kind of surprised he got a Best Actor nomination. I was like, this is not artist level acting. But I look at it now watching it, I'm much more impressed because maybe I was thinking more of the mindset of what the Oscars were, especially back then, which was you have to have big dramatic performances. It's not the best acting, it's the most acting. And here it's so restrained that it just draws you in, and it held my attention through every second of his screen time. And so, I mean, it left me wanting more, so I guess it did its job really well.
And that's why Gary Oldman's performance is in a positive for me, because I think what he does is absolutely tremendous. And I think if that's the reason I can convince you to go watch this film, do it for Gary Oldman. But I as a lead protagonist in the film, I do struggle to get behind George Smiley. Now, that may be a choice from director, from scripting, from Gary, sure. But there's no one in this film I really want to do well.
Right.
Everyone's just not very nice one way or another. And that's
Maybe
the reality.
Tom Hardy? Tom Hardy's okay.
He's still killing people.
Yeah, that's true. Benedict Cumberbatch, he doesn't seem that bad.
Okay, I'll maybe let you off Benedict Cumberbatch. But he's a B, maybe C tier character in the film.
They're also younger. They haven't been hardened in the same way, him and Hardy, the way that a lot of the other older co-stars are.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe I just don't like seeing reality in the characters too much, because I'm like I know what life is actually like, and it's this is a very good approximation of what real life is like out there, and that makes me sad. But I'll come off of me, and I want to go to Cam for likes? Because I know people hearing me not like George Smiley might rub people the wrong way. I hope you've understood why that maybe just doesn't work for me. But Cam, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I mentioned the production design. We talked about that, which is, I mean, it is a star unto itself. And I was going to say, though, about Smiley and the depiction of him here, it also feels very Thomas Alfredson. When you look at the performances in Let the Right One In, the way Smiley comes across is somewhat similar, where it is that kind of removed, almost impenetrable kind of vibe to him. So I do wonder how much that was the direction. But I think for me, this is a movie that is, Scott, I think you said it. It's all of these pieces coming together and kind of a miracle situation. And I look at the cast that way. To have this collection of actors all together, and some of them were not, big stars like they are now. Tom Hardy and Benedict Cumberbatch were, known quantities, but they were not movie stars. They were not Bane and Doctor Strange yet. And you just have all of these actors bouncing off each other. And it's a case where it's like, if you have nothing but great actors, every scene is going to be magnetic, because whether they're on their own or playing off each other, it's just alive. And so when I'm watching those scenes of the control room and it's Toby Jones or, John Hurt barking at people, I'm just like on the edge of my seat. And it went like that through every kind of side story. Mark Strong, I mentioned him earlier. And I think at the time, I would have looked at him maybe a little bit as kind of one of the lesser of some of the other bigger talents, like just in terms of, name value and stature in the industry.
So like Mark Weak?
Mark, not as strong.
Oh, that rolls off the tongue. Yeah, sure.
But there's so much to his performance that I really was falling in love with this time. The way, like, you see kind of his experiences after he's been tortured. You don't really get a sense that. I was a little confused by the timeline initially of him teaching at the school and beating owls to death. that was a thing. But the way you see kind of the regret and that moment he shares with Colin Firth at the Christmas party that's then reflected back when he executes him at the prison. I'm like, Mark Strong just communicated so much as a capper to this movie, like, wordlessly.
Well, that's actually, it's interesting you raise that, because it's actually in my notes section, but this is the second time watching it, I'd never picked up on that sort of subtext until watching it today.
Yeah.
Of the sort of relationship or potential of there being a relationship beyond friends between those two characters. Because there is genuinely a look of heartbreak in Mark Strong's face at that Christmas party.
I was reminded a lot of The Deadly Affair, where you had James Mason's reactions to Maximilian Schell and vomiting in the sink over, his reaction to seeing Maximilian Schell. And it's like, okay, like, I like that there's these kind of subtle nuances. You can read it however you'd like, but there's a power to what Mark Strong is communicating. And I would love to know, maybe I don't want to know, what he was thinking in that moment, like how he was playing it.
Well, I mean, the subtext, I think Cam and I are both reading into it. Jeff, to throw it to you, is that something that's present in the other versions of this story, or is that really a film?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's
version?
definitely something that you see in the novel, and that's the kind of, it's not like outright stated, but it's basically that's what's going on. Is there's this kind
Which is, you wouldn't really outright state it in those days anyway. So
yeah, so.
I mean, the fact that when he's executed and it's the bullet under the eye and it looks like a teardrop, I mean, that is artistry right there.
That's a man with something to say.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's Thomas Alfredson's staging. I mean, when he's on, he's an incredible director. And it's a bummer that The Snowman was such a debacle for him and that we don't see him making movies that, well, frankly, we see anymore.
Well, and you get a sense of the horror. Like, I mean, you talk about his first movie, and there is a lot of kind of horror imagery in this kind of like the whether it's that assassination at the end or when Irina gets shot in front of him in the jail cell, or just at the very beginning, right, where you see the guy is trying to shoot Mark Strong and he accidentally kills this mother who's breastfeeding. And I mean, there's just all of these kind of really haunting images that you see again and again. Or the one guy that Tom Hardy runs into, right, that has been killed. So there is a element of that, and especially at the very end when you're waiting for the mole to show up, there's this tension there that he really is very good at building.
I think of Boris in the bathtub as well, who's like been gutted. Like that is a moment that just like sticks in your brain.
I never looked at it in that sort of horror angle until you all just said that. That's really interesting. But it definitely is in the film. There are some really horrible deaths just from the ones we mentioned, but also like the dead mother with the baby still trying to breastfeed. Like that's gonna stick with you.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And also, but it's not hung on. Like it literally it's like a 2-second shot, and we move on to something else, which is the breakneck speed of this film.
And they're often like a tableau. It's just a shot of a body or something, and it just like worms into your brain, and we move on. And it's funny because like I don't think if you ask people, is Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy a really violent movie? People would be like, yes. I think most would say no, it's not. And yet I think some of the violence depicted in it is far more impactful than it is in the movies that Scott, you and I have tackled that are, full blown like action movies. Say like The Long Kiss Goodnight. I don't think of as being as haunting as what's in this movie. That's for sure.
No, because it's all just so
over the top.
Throwaway too. Like death doesn't have any meaning in Long Kiss Goodnight. People are dying left, right, and center. Death has weight in this film.
Yeah.
And so does loyalty, which is a big part of it. While we're talking about characters, and I know Jeff, you said you were talking about the Carla speech, and I think that's probably the standout moment of the film. It's definitely in the trailer. But I wanted to hear from you all who you think the MVP is, apart from Gary Oldman.
No, I probably just because he's the guy, kind of our view into the circus is Benedict Cumberbatch. He gets some really nice moments. That whole sequence where he is sneaking into the circus to steal this file. I mean, that's like you could pull that whole scene out and make it its own little movie. That's really just so good. And then the moment where, and this is something that's not in the books, but they have made his character Gwillem gay, and he has to go and break up with his boyfriend to try and keep them from coming after him. That was another really effective scene where we don't hear any dialogue, right? I mean, it's all from the acting, and it's again just a really wonderful way of picking how you're going to show these sequences that I think the director does really amazing.
It's like little character touches that are so subtle they don't call attention to themselves in a way, but they really add to the larger tapestry.
So who you go with, Cam?
This is actually a really tough question. I
think it should be Mark Strong.
That's where I'm leaning. I think Mark Strong is probably who I would say is, the MVP. I think Tom Hardy is also great. But I think I'm going to give it to Mark Strong because I think Tom Hardy gets enough MVP awards in life.
Yeah, he certainly gets enough films to lead.
Exactly.
I'm going to go for a name we haven't even mentioned yet.
Okay.
And I think, but only because I think the two you've picked are probably the two of the best, but I want to add a third one into the mix. And that is David Dencik as Toby Esterhazy. I just think that scene where he's sort of kidnapped and taken to the airfield and I guess interrogated without actually being formally interrogated, but he interrogates himself, is really quite something that it's quite spectacular. And I think there's a ton of tension running through it thanks to that plane landing and coming really close and stuff. But there's no gun waving. There's no like chopping off of limbs or anything like that. It gets the same amount of tension you'd get out of one of those cheesy 80s films where they like strap a guy's junk to a battery or something like that, with literally nothing.
Yeah, I was blown away by that scene. And again, Thomas Alfredson really directed the hell out of that with that plane. And that's just like, I'm sure the plane was much, much, much farther away from those actors than it looks. And just through, the right lens on a camera and great direction, it just is this like unstoppable juggernaut bearing down on them.
Well, and it's a scene that could have taken place in an office someplace, right? And by putting it there, it just gives it a whole different vibe that is really amazing.
But before I move us on to dislikes, any other likes people want to chime in with?
I really liked some of the Hitchcockian elements. There's some Rear Window here. when you have Tom Hardy watching the apartment opposite, and that's where Irina first comes into the picture. And then you have like a scene where Gary Oldman is sitting kind of waiting for someone to come through a door. It felt a lot like Hitchcock, but also Rear Window specifically. And so I also then was thinking to myself, you have that scene where Tom Hardy's watching that apartment, and the way it's framed, again, looks like Rear Window, but it also looks a lot like that scene in Skyfall where Bond sees Severin and there's an assassination through a window. And I began to wonder if they were just inspired by Tinker Tailor, which obviously made a big splash, so it wouldn't be a surprise if they were influenced by that movie.
I'd never put those two together, but I guess that is, and a 3 if you add Rear Window.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. Who knows?
Yeah. A great sequence, though. Jeff, any additional likes you want to mention?
I just love the way that they used flashbacks in this movie, and the way that they kind of, they'd have the voiceover and it would kind of cut to that. And it was just a very effective use of that. And I don't know if you are familiar, like Jeremy Brett Sherlock Holmes movies that they used to have, back in the day on the PBS or here. But that was a very Sherlock Holmesian thing. They'd have somebody come in, they'd tell this story, and it would be this whole flashback, and it just gave me those kind of vibes. Since I was a big fan of that, I just really liked how that worked. And one last thing, I know you're, anti-Smiley in here, but I do think it's okay. It's all right. I think that scene that we have where he's talking about meeting Carla in Delhi in the jail cell is so good, and it's just that such an insight into the character. And I think that at that moment, maybe that's the moment where you kind of click over to rooting for Smiley a little bit, because it's the first chance that we really get him talking about what's going on with him. And just the way they filmed it, after having all these flashbacks, we don't get a flashback. He's just talking to a chair, and it's so engrossing. You picture Carla sitting in that chair, and that's all through his Oldman's acting. It's just extraordinary.
They use empty chairs really effectively, because there's also a part where he talks about Anne, and there's an empty chair opposite him as well. But I had a question for you. Now, we don't really get to see much of Carla here, and this is obviously a trilogy of novels. Who would be good casting for Carla had there been a sequel where we saw Carla?
Ooh. Well, now, you guys are Star Trek fans. You know who played Carla in Smiley's People, the TV show?
Patrick Stewart?
Yeah.
So. Okay. So I didn't know he played that role, but yeah, I was familiar. He was in that Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
Wait, spoilers? No!
Yeah. Okay, so that type then. Okay.
But yeah, a good question, though, because, you'd want to get, you have the heavy hitters of all of these British actors. I'm trying to think of another person with that weight. Maybe, just because I've been reading his memoir, Brian Cox, I could see him.
I was about to suggest Brian Cox, thanks to his Russian accent in the Red films.
Yeah, and he's a good mastermind. You look at him in the Bourne films and also as Hannibal Lecter in Manhunter. Sure.
I think we could all pretty much sign off on that one.
Yeah.
I don't want to leave everyone listening who's tuning in for the first time thinking that this isn't the case, but apparently now our Spy Hard's logo is Spy Hard's podcast, the anti-George Smiley podcast. or at least Scott is. I'm sure I'm a big fan of that.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special report.
Red Alert Spy Hards, we are shaking things up over on the Patreon page.
That's right, we are launching an exclusive new show where we tackle the exploits of the small screen's greatest secret agents, like Jack Bauer, George Smiley, and beyond.
And don't forget, every month you also get 2 Agents in the Field episodes where we decode the adventures of your favorite spy actors in their biggest non-spy movies. But Cam, tell the people what we have coming up next.
Well, Scott, as a festive treat, we are going to be looking on OSS this month at 2 Christmas episodes of the hit animated series Totally Spies. Will these 2 tinsel-tinted spy capers have us going whoop whoop or womp womp?
So strap on your Condor Man wings and soar into the future with us over at patreon.com/spyhards.
But before Big O zaps us with a red pulsating laser, let's get back to the spy jinx.
Okay, folks. It is Christmas time. We are celebrating, of course, Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. We're finally talking about it. You happy? Well, we are. But there may be the odd dislike we want to discuss. Jeff, I'm going to throw it to you, sir. Is there a critique you can make of this film?
I don't know. It was watching it this time. I don't know if it's a real critique, but watching it this time, there was this thing at the very end. I had this flashback to, I don't know how familiar either of you are with the TV show Dawson's Creek. But
I know the theme song and I know the actors, obviously, but I was not a watcher of that show. But yeah.
Okay, well, but like every one of those like kind of 90s TV teen shows, at the very end, there'd be all this, stuff going on. And then at the very end, it would be a musical montage that would kind of wrap up the episode, right? You'd see everybody walking. And that I kind of got that vibe from Tinker Tailor, because that's kind of what happens here. You get a shot of everybody, it's just kind of wrapping things up with this musical montage. And it just felt very 90s teen soap a little bit. It worked, but I was just like, this time in particular, it jumped out to me as that. So
it's like Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy 90210?
a little bit, yeah. And the other ding I'd say is just the mystery. It works, but we don't get enough time with the suspects to really build them up as viable suspects. So,
yeah, that's actually kind of pivots into my dislike, which is like it still holds, the way I felt in some ways from the first time, which is that you just don't know them as personalities enough. And so, like, the one that really jumped out to me was, I think Toby Jones, you get enough. I would have liked a little more in terms of, you see him walking out at the end, and just more of a sense of what he was going through, because you have a real understanding as to what ultimately was going on with Colin Firth, whereas with Toby Jones, it's a little more obscured, or just didn't make the adaptation from book to film. But the actor who I feel like got the short shrift was Ciarán Hinds, who is so like iconic in this movie. Like, he just has a face that you put him in that room, you can't help but just stare at him. And, you have that scene where he's like having a rooftop meeting. And again, not a lot of like actual, big time acting required, but I couldn't stop watching him in that scene. And I just felt like it, when you're looking at the various players, who's going to show up, I just didn't know anything about him whatsoever.
yeah, he's mainly just a menacing kind of character, right? And he does get that great moment where right after Gwillem has stolen the file, he's humming the song that was playing on the radio that they were recording. So it's just like creepy, but no, not a lot of there for his character.
Is there a lot more for those characters, like in the book or the miniseries?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely get to know the players, and it feels more like, okay, these are our suspects. Let's figure out who it is, for sure.
I think ultimately one of the things we've all came to a decision on is this film works mostly as a mood piece. So we don't necessarily need the depth of character in all of these people. We just sort of follow our protagonists following the clues until we get to a resolution. But I definitely take your point, especially Ciarán Hinds, but I think even like Toby Jones and stuff, they all do suffer from this, of really just sort of being placeholders. Or ciphers, perhaps, which is, again, perhaps a choice. There's not a lot you can really tell a difference between each of the four of them.
Yeah.
Like, I couldn't really give you any characteristics for each of them.
I was genuinely shocked when I sat down to watch this movie that it was 2 hours.
Yeah.
My memory was it was 2.5. And I was like, oh. And then, it's, I think, 128 minutes, but the credits start at the 2 hour mark.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a lot of material to condense into 2 hours.
I think you can actively feel the film pulling against that a lot of the time, because there's so much it wants to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
I do get that sensation. I think they found the perfect balance for this film, but I could see anyone coming out of this making the argument that I didn't know who anyone was, or who or what anyone stood for. Because the four people in the room are just people. I'm not even sure I could tell you their character names despite having seen the film twice.
Right. And I wonder if they felt like the slow burn of this movie, and it's a very slow burn atmosphere, would be a little too prolonged at 2.5 hours.
Oh, I think they shot more for sure. I think they edited it down a lot because it just. I don't think people would have that attention span for such a rich and complex text to be hit over the head with it for 2.5 hours.
I think it works, and that's like, I guess, falls under a like, but I think it genuinely holds together very well.
I think that's probably also, though, why they chose such a murderer's row of British actors, right? Because with the maybe not being able to delve into the characters, you're leaning a little bit more on just them as the
performance.
Yes, as what we know of them, right? Of going in as the actor.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, because the first time I saw the movie, I felt frustrated by the reveal of not having a great sense as to who Colin Firth's character was, but I always remembered it was Colin Firth.
Yeah.
Because that actor just has presence, and there's a lot of movies, maybe movies that, the first time I saw them, I liked way more, but if I were to revisit them, it's almost, like 15 years later, I wouldn't remember the outcomes to things. A lot of it would be more vague, whereas I remembered a lot of this movie, and I think it is that casting.
Well, they still make you care a little bit about the character despite knowing nothing about them, especially Colin Firth. Like when he's in that, I guess, holding area, and I would feel like an RAF base, to be honest with you, at the end.
Yeah.
Like you do feel for him despite having, I'm guessing, done quite abhorrent things in terms of handing data over to the enemy.
Yeah.
You feel that there's a human being in there that's made a mistake, isn't necessarily repenting for it, but, we've all made mistakes.
And they give him like something of a, interior life too, because when he's going to be sent to prison, he says, "Can you please give money to this woman and tell her I love her?" There's also a boy. And then we also get the reveal of kind of the Mark Strong relationship, if you want to see it that way or not. Like I definitely do. But like there's a life to that character. It does not end with him being kind of just this vaguely defined bad guy mole.
Interestingly, I actually read that scene differently, as in, this is for the woman, tell her I love her, and then there was also a boy.
Yeah.
I read that as like, there's a guy I'm seeing.
Yeah, I kind of lean that way, but the language was ambiguous.
Well, like, as if like could be a boy he's had with the girl, like a son maybe, or something like that. Yeah.
It's definitely supposed to be, like, at least from the book, it's supposed to be another guy that he's been seeing.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm glad they left that mildly ambiguous. It doesn't have to be overly stated. I think we would be keeping those things close to the chest, even now. A lot of people, let alone in the 1970s.
Well, the subtlety is what makes this movie, I think, a lot of fun. Honestly.
Yeah. That takes me on to my dislike.
George Smiley again.
George Smiley. This guy can't hold down a wife. What's wrong with him?
Kneecap him.
She's running around getting it from everyone else. This guy needs to take some lessons.
Right.
Go see Hitch or something. Where's Will Smith?
That would be an amazing sequel.
George
Hitch.
Smiley and Hitch.
The dance lessons alone would be worth the ticket.
No, the one I think I was going to mention is, and this isn't something I suffered from, but it's something I read a lot about from reading peer reviews after watching the film today. If you're one of those people that likes to track the actual plot, the dot to dot of a scheme of trying to find the mole throughout the film, there is information there, but this film requires a strict amount of dedication to really focus in on and get. And if you're someone who is mildly passively watching this film, and some may argue you shouldn't passively watch any film, if you look away for 2 minutes to check your phone, you're done.
Which is how you'll feel as well with Abduction.
Actually, I think you would benefit from taking 2 minutes away to come back to it then. You're like, oh, I like this film more now.
No, I agree. You're right. Yeah, this is a movie you kind of have to give yourself over to for 2 hours.
And some people aren't prepared to do that. And so I think there will be a group of people that were taken to see this film in the theaters, or will be shown this film by their friends or family or loved ones, that will never be able to really appreciate it because they aren't able to give it that attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a little bit like, a Stanley Kubrick film. They're kind of meant to just that's what you're doing for the next 2 hours, or 2.5 or whatever, and you need to just focus on what the storyteller is trying to do.
Even if it is 10 whole minutes of just psychedelic, just nonsense.
Especially if it's 10 minutes of psychedelic nonsense.
And then there's a space baby for some reason. Is that the boy that Colin Firth was talking about? Is he the parent of the space baby?
The Star Child?
Yeah. Who knows? That's a weird crossover I just made. Well, I think that wraps up the dislikes then, because I think we all really enjoyed this film. So I don't think we need to dig too much into what's wrong with it, because I don't think there is that much wrong with it. Let's go to final notes, because I have a few interesting things I want to bring up. But Jeff, do you have any sort of final notes you'd like to bring up?
Well, I don't know if one of you was going to mention this, but in the Christmas party, because, Christmas theme, right? Le Carré does have a cameo in there. So if you keep your eyes peeled,
Yes.
you'll see him kind of partying it down. He was in real life kind of a big ham, so he loved that stuff. So that was kind of fun, I thought.
Yeah, he had a fun cameo in Night Manager. That one was the one I remember more so, but yeah, I did spot him in this one.
I think there's a good little cast photo of all of them at the Christmas party with John le Carré there as well, which is quite nice.
Oh, okay.
I'll see if I can find that and put it online. For those who want to see it, for me, first and foremostly, did you all spot the what I'll call the Skyfall dog, but it is Jack the Bulldog from Royal Dalton?
I had questions about this.
Oh, okay.
Now, I'm not British, so I am ignorant.
What? Whoa! You're not?
I know the accent sounds British, but
Yeah.
although I am from British Columbia, so perhaps I'm halfway there. But Scott, we saw that M had one of these in Skyfall. Is this something that like the head of MI5 would just naturally have?
You just inherit it from the person before you, basically. Like it's a hand-me-down.
Well, like, you know how you'll have like a painting or whatever, a photograph of the Queen or President, depending on which intelligence agency you're with. With the British agency, is there also like a ceramic bulldog in every office?
It's like a welcome present when you get a new office. It's here's Jack the Bulldog.
I'm being semi-serious. Like, is that actually something you would have?
I can't answer that question because I'm not a spy cam, but listeners, let us know. In your spy offices, do you have Jack the Bulldog? We want to hear. And then by writing into us, you're also outing yourself as a spy. So that was a bad move. Honestly, your tradecraft needs some work.
Also, Skyfall introduced that as well, which is the next year. Something else that may have... It's not like the Bond films to ever take from a popular film. It's not like them at all, but who knows?
How dare you? Blasphemy. This is outrageous accusations you're making about the Bond films here, that they steal ideas.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got some final notes as well. Why is Mark Strong letting his students drive cars?
It was the 70s, man.
It was the style at the time, Cam.
It seemed insane to have a kid driving a car around while other kids are like chasing after it. It's like, oh my God.
You got to give him credit, though. Is there any way to get your class under control than killing an owl right in front of them?
True. Very true.
Shock and awe. I think that's what that tactic is called.
I was like, that is the very dark Harry Potter version.
Yeah. No one's going to Hogwarts this year, kids.
Another point I had, we see Smiley swimming a couple times.
I was going to mention this. Go on.
Scott, when are you going to go swimming there and shoot video of that for the audience?
I could, if you like. It's in the Serpentine. And I have a story about this, if you'd like to hear it.
Uh-oh.
Oh, please.
So there was this one time I was out in Soho. No, I'm kidding. But there was this one time I was parked up in a van for undisclosed reasons during a snowstorm in Hyde Park.
Okay.
And I was having lunch with my colleague, and we spotted the catchment area where the people go in to swim. We were just sort of overseeing that area. That's where we were having our lunch, where we parked up. We wanted to have a nice view with our lunch, but like everywhere was blanketed with snow. It was minus centigrade outside the van doors, certainly outside. And eating our lunch. And then we see this frail-looking old man wander down into this open area where you get undressed in an open area to get into the water. And he gets in and proceeds to do about 30 laps of the place, and I had to like, I was transfixed by this guy who was in at least -2, -3, swimming in the Serpentine.
Oh,
I mean, the balls on that guy. I mean, the balls would have been very small by the end of that swimming.
like raisins.
You have to look for him, I'll tell you that.
The old man scrotum or whatever it was that Alfredson
that's the
mentioned.
color. That's the color.
Or foreskin, I suppose it was.
Stop saying that word on this podcast, please. I have witnessed someone doing that in sub-zero temperatures, and I was blown away. So seeing it in this film was like, oh, cool. This is what the normal person doing it looks like.
Oh my god! So you need to get a shot of you swimming in that area.
I'd say next time you come to London, we'll go there, and I'll get in. You can just film.
Okay, that sounds good. And in this film, actually, the Budapest locations, they have a shot looking out over the city. And I didn't realize when I visited Budapest that I actually took a photo in that exact spot looking out over the city. So I was like, wow, who knew I was visiting Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy locations? I knew I was visiting Bond locations when I was in Europe. Didn't know that one.
Well, it just makes you a better spy, I'd say, really.
It does.
You know.
It does.
Yeah.
And my final note was Tom Hardy. He's on, this assignment, and he's like, I'm going to go and meet this woman. He goes up, knocks on her door, and she just invites him right in. I'm like, this would not work for most spies. If this is Toby Jones showing up at that front door, he's not getting in.
That's the quickest door slam you've ever seen.
Right? I'm like, come on.
Yeah, it's certainly a glimpse into a world neither you nor I will ever understand, Cam.
No.
Jeff is a different story. Like, he's getting led into all the rooms.
That's
this
right.
guy is a stud, folks. I know this is an audio podcast, but I can't keep my eyes off him.
I've got a face for radio. Sorry.
He's no George Smiley. I'm saying that, though. Few are. Well, okay. We're left with the final question. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, our second to last film of the year 2024. And our Christmas film this year. Is it making the knock list, the list of the greatest spy films of all time, the must-see spy films, according to us two uneducated losers? Yeah, that's something that's often been pointed out. Like, who's judging this? Us.
That's
Great.
right. That's right.
Yeah, that passes the test. But Jeff, let's hear from you first. Yes or no? Is it making the knock list?
Well, I can glance right over here. I have a poster from the film on my wall. I think I'm tipping my hand here. I think it's definitely deserves to be there. So.
Okay, that's one yes. All still to play for, though, folks. Cam could really throw us right now. What do you have, Mr. Smith?
I said no to The Deadly Affair. I said no to The Russia House. I definitely said no. I said no sale to Little Drummer Girl. But I'm going to say yes to Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. I think this movie just works. And I wouldn't have had the perspective as well at the time when I saw it of the influence it would have. And that's something I do take into account. I have to enjoy the movie and feel strongly about the movie to say yes. But I do take also the impact of the movie into account as well when there's been a significant one. And we have seen how Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy has influenced the spy films that have come after. So I think it's very important as well. And I want to say, though, the Night Manager did make the boss list. So that's pretty great. But I think Tinker Tailor deserves to be on the knock list.
Yeah, well, there you go. 2 yeses. My vote is null and void, but I'll throw it in anyway. Here's my hat in the ring. It's obviously a yes. I don't think it's interesting because when we rarely tackle these very big prestige spy films, the ones that you always write in and ask us to tackle, the easy thing to do is to be like, yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, knock list, cool. But there is something crazy about this film. The fact that it happened, the fact that something so dense made it through to a 2-hour film blows my mind, and it's just so approachable. The acting is top-notch, cinematography, editing, directing, it's all there. If you want a spy film that is not all rah-rah, sis-boom-rah, it's not Bond girls and gadgets, it is people. It's dealing with real life, real people, and what actually happens and the consequences of betrayal. This is your spy film. It's a firm yes from me. And it's making the knock list.
Okay, there we have it. Our first Le Carré on the actual knock list.
Yeah, I think it's about time George joined James.
That's right, yeah. And Jason.
And Jason. Good company to have, I'd say.
And Matt Helm.
And Matt Helm. Yeah. And the Spy Kids.
Oh, God. What have we done?
Wait, who's picking this list again? Oh, no. We may have done our own legs in. No, but there you go. 3 yeses, and as such, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy is making the knock list. The dossier on the film is complete and filed as classified. That's another Christmas spy film in the books.
That's right. And so I guess next year will be Invasion USA with Chuck Norris.
Oh, but we've only got a couple left. That might just be your choice. Yeah. But hey, it's a different thing, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. And who knows what other Christmas spy movies will come out in the future. So, yeah.
We could always be surprised. And there's one question I wanted to ask to you, Jeff, to sort of finish off our discussion about Tinker Tailor. And that is, we didn't really talk about it, but the idea of a sequel. Because it feels like there was something here. And they had the cast, and they had the actors in place, and I'm sure a lot of them signed deals where there was options to do a second film. Do you know what happened?
They definitely wanted to do one right after. I think they wanted to go off maybe and make something else and then come back to it. And it kept coming up. I know Oldman really wanted to do it. Director and the writer were both game. I think what happened though, this is the last movie to be released before the Carré's sons started their own production company to start adapting his work for film and television.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really is what was at play. There was a recent interview with Oldman's manager where he said basically his sons kind of put the kibosh on a sequel happening. And I'm pretty sure that's why, because they have been looking to kind of reboot the Smiley universe, if you want to call it that, the Smiley multiverse. And
Oh, no.
and so, yes.
The Smiley verse?
And so they're looking to do a TV version of The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. I'm sure they're trying to be the next kind of Slow Horses.
Right.
And that's kind of the goal there, I think. And so that kind of just torpedoed the idea of the sequel, especially when it didn't happen right away. I think that was the kind of death knell.
And I think now with Gary Oldman playing Jackson Lamb in Slow Horses, I think he's playing his George Smiley, but his version.
Yeah.
Well, Mick Herron's version, but still, you get my point.
Yeah, I also just don't know at this point. Look, we'd go see a sequel. People that love Le Carré, novels and adaptations would go and see it. But I don't know if the larger marketplace would be as drawn into a sequel to this movie in 2025 and beyond.
And from the kids' perspective, I could definitely see the idea of wanting to start fresh, maybe with cheaper actors on a TV scale.
Yeah.
And try and work from the beginning of the books through. Whereas instead of I think this comes towards the end of the Smiley books.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and the other thing is, this is a really, if you're looking for something to make an adaptation of, this is the one. Smiley's People is good, but I think this is the one that really has the story. I mean, obviously it's based on Kim Philby, so there's that mole, and it's just got that, something there that's going to keep it a little more relevant. And Smiley's People would have been a harder sell, I think.
And that's the kind of insight you can get on the Le Carré cast with our man Jeff Quest.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
It was a cheap plug for your show, but people go and listen to it. There'll be links in the show notes below. Jeff, it's been a pleasure having you here at Christmas time. You can now take off your plastic little hat you get out of the poppers, and you can also get out of the turkey costume, which I think was a bit much, to be honest with you.
Whatever it takes, I'm here for you guys. I'm gonna go over and above.
So we'll see you for Abduction.
I can't wait. I'm going to see it right now.
I feel like that's the perfect other side of this now, isn't it? Just such what looks like a terrible movie.
Scott, you're watching it now, just even if it doesn't go on the podcast, because we know that about you.
I've just rented it on Amazon. It's happening. It's happening.
Don't lie, Scott. You didn't rent it. You bought. You clicked buy.
The true lie was saying I've never seen a Taylor Lautner film. I've seen them all.
Yeah.
The real question is why there hasn't been a sequel to Abduction. So
I think we will answer that question at some point, I'm sure.
Now, is it like I don't even know that I can like say this out loud, but you know they did Hot Shots Part 2?
Yeah.
Is it abduction?
You were right. You definitely couldn't say it
Yeah,
out loud.
it doesn't work. It's
No,
you'd have to write it out for it to make sense.
maybe.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't, though.
No.
But, Jeff, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for joining us for our Christmas special. And I'm glad we could finally talk about this film. I hope we did it justice, and I hope your listeners really enjoyed the discussion too.
It's been great talking with both of you. I really appreciate it, and thanks for having me on. I can't think of a better Christmas gift than talking about Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy.
There you go. There you go, folks. That was Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy. We finally did it. And I think we did it quite well.
Yes, this is one that was a little daunting. There are those movies on our list, or ones we've covered in the past, that are kind of these like staples of the spy genre. And you go into those episodes thinking like, okay, we got to deliver because people really, really care about these movies. And I think, we had a lot of fun on this one. And Jeff, he brought the goods.
He did. And if you want to hear more from Jeff, we've had him on a couple of times in the past, including this very year on The Deadly Affair, another George Smiley kind of story. Go back and check that out, and also go and check out his wonderful podcasts, the Carré Cast, and of course, Barbican Station. There'll be links in the show notes below. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you all, firstly, for joining us over the last 12 months. We've still got a couple of episodes left this year. The Spy Jinx doesn't quite stop yet, but I want to thank you all because we're heading into the Christmas period, and listenership, you'll be busy with your presents and your family, and we understand that. So, whilst you're here, we want to thank you all for tuning in for the last year and supporting the show, listening every week, and just helping to support Spy Hards Online, telling your friends, and spreading the Spy Hards love with us, and the spy movie love, which is what we love, ultimately.
Yeah, exactly. I love that people are here, not just for Tinker Tailor or Bond films or Mission Impossible films, but like this year we did some really, wacky stuff. We did like Killer Elite or Berlin Correspondent or, Possession. Some movies that I think were outside of the norm of what people think of when they think of popular spy entertainment, but it's always so encouraging when you guys show up and comment on those episodes and just let us know that like you're as interested as we are in diving into the spy canon. It always makes me feel good.
No, absolutely. And we'll talk a little bit more about the year of 2024 in our upcoming year-end wrap-up, one of my favorite episodes to record every year. That's coming in 2 weeks. But Cam, what do we have coming up next week?
Well, Scott, we can't close out the year without finishing off a franchise that's kind of been left dangling. And so we're actually going to get this episode out a little earlier than initially planned. We are going to bid farewell to Dave Bautista and Chloe Coleman by tackling the second and seemingly final My Spy film, My Spy: The Eternal City, from the glorious year that was 2024.
Yes, we figured we would try and close off this loop on this franchise whilst we were still in this year so we could start afresh in 2025. And we have some great franchises lined up to start next year, including a certain number you're all familiar with. But I'll leave that there. But we had a lot of fun with the first My Spy. It had its issues, but there were some things to enjoy in that. Can the sequel better the formula? There's only one way to find out. Join us next week as we take a look at My Spy, The Eternal City, with Dave Bautista and Chloe Coleman. And if you want to help support Spy Hards, we mentioned the Patreon earlier in the show. We try not to shove it in your faces too much, and we understand this is it's tight times. It's a season of giving. You want to look after your loved ones, and I think that's something you should always do first. But if you have a bit of spare change and you want to help support Spy Hards and keep the lights on here at Spy Hards HQ, we have a Patreon. You can go over to patreon.com/spyhards. There's over 100 bonus episodes available, and basically every bit of money you give to us through there goes back into running the show. We're not making money out of it. This isn't a business. This is literally just so we can pay for hosting, we can pay for equipment, and making sure you get the best listening experience on the free show that does come out every single week and hasn't stopped for coming up to 5 years.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. We always appreciate anyone who jumps over there, and we have a lot of fun on that content, so it's great when people listen to it.
Yeah, that's actually the main thing. I just want more people to hear it because there's some great reviews. We did Star Wars films, all kinds of stuff over there. And we take listener requests too. Like if there's films you want us to tackle, we will listen to you and try and work that into the schedule as well. And of course, if you don't already, make sure to follow us discreetly on social media at Spyhards. That's SPYHARDS on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. But until next time, folks, you'll find Cam and I working furiously on our script treatment for the George Smiley Hitch crossover, hopefully coming to theaters in 2026.